Hello, my fellow dreamers, and welcome to tonight's Bedtime Lore. In this story, we'll drift into the magical world through the eyes of the man himself, Albus Dumbledore. Before we begin, a small reminder. This video is completely ad-free, so there will be no interruptions, no sudden noises, nothing to wake you from your calm. If you enjoy what we do here, your like and subscription mean the world. It helps this little corner of magic keep growing. Now, place your phone face down, let the screen fade to darkness, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let your mind wander to the candlelit halls of Hogwarts as we begin the tale of Albus Dumbledore. Long before the wars and prophecies, before he became the most revered wizard of his age, Albus Percival Wulfric, Brian Dumbledore was simply a boy born into quiet obscurity. His story began in the summer of 1881 in a small, sleepy village in the west country of England, a place called Mold on the Wold. His parents, Percival Dumbledore and Kendra Dumbledore, were not famous names then. They were an ordinary wizarding family with extraordinary misfortune waiting at their door. Percival Dumbledore was a kind but proud man, a wizard of some skill, known for his temper when his loved ones were threatened. Kendra, his wife, was a witch of mixed heritage, strong-willed, fiercely protective, and cautious about the world around them. In an era when wizard-muggle relations were tense and fragile, the Dumbledores kept mostly to themselves. They had 3 children, Albus, the eldest, born brilliant and curious, Aberforth, younger and more grounded, and Ariana, the youngest, whose life would define them all. When Albus was still a child, Ariana was attacked. It was not a magical duel, not even a fair fight. 3 Muggle boys had seen her perform accidental magic, and in their fear, they hurt her badly. The details were whispered about for generations, but the truth was this: their attack shattered her mind and her magic. From that day, Ariana could no longer control her powers. They would burst out violently and unpredictably. Kendra was forced to hide her away from the world, and Percival, enraged beyond reason, sought vengeance. He tracked down the boys and cursed them. That act sealed the Dumbledore's fate. Percival was arrested by the Ministry of Magic and sentenced to Azkaban for his assault on Muggles. He refused to defend himself, refused to reveal the reason behind his crime, because he feared Ariana would be taken away and locked in St. Mungo's. To protect his daughter, he let the world believe he was a blood purist who despised Muggles. Albus grew up under the shadow of that shame, carrying the weight of his father's supposed hatred, and never forgetting the cost of silence. Kendra moved the family to Godric's Hollow, hoping for peace and anonymity. Godric's Hollow was a place of old magic, the resting ground of great wizards and witches, among them Godric Gryffindor himself. There, in that quiet village, Albus began to blossom. He devoured books on transfiguration and charms, experimented with alchemy, and wrote letters to magical scholars twice his age. Even as a boy, he was marked by brilliance that others would call unnatural. Yet behind that brilliance lived guilt, a son who could not heal his sister, a brother who could not forgive himself. At Hogwarts, Albus was sorted into Gryffindor, though he might easily have fit into Ravenclaw. His professors quickly realized he was exceptional. By his 2nd year, he could perform spells most students learned in their 7th. By his 5th, he was studying ancient runes, magical theory, and advanced alchemy under private tutelage. Students admired him, teachers trusted him, and he never seemed to fail. Yet even in triumph, his letters home were tinged with longing for the family he left behind. While Albus studied, Kendra struggled to care for Ariana. Her magical fits grew worse. Aberforth, who had always been closest to her, stayed home to help. He resented Albus's absence, resented his endless hunger for learning, his detachment from their pain. The tension between the brothers was quiet but real, and it would explode one day with devastating force. When Albus graduated, he was already a name whispered with awe in the wizarding world. The great alchemist Nicholas Flamel corresponded with him. Bathilda Bagshot, the historian of magical lore, became his mentor and friend. She often spoke of her young relative, a prodigy from across the sea, a boy named Gellert Grindelwald. That meeting, when it came, would change everything. But before destiny introduced Albus to Grindelwald, tragedy struck again. Ariana's magic lashed out one summer day, a storm of uncontrollable energy. Kendra was killed instantly. The neighbors whispered that the Dumbledores were cursed, that their magic had turned on them. Albus, just barely of age and newly graduated, returned home to take responsibility for his broken family. It was then that the world first saw the other side of Albus Dumbledore, the man caught between genius and guilt. He was brilliant, yes, but now bound by duty. He dreamed of grand discoveries, of transforming the magical world, yet he was trapped in a small cottage with grief and resentment for company. Aberforth raged against him, claiming he cared more for books than for Ariana's life. Albus swallowed the blame and said nothing. He was the elder. It was his cross to bear. Then came Grindelwald. Bathilda Bagshot's great-nephew had been expelled from Durmstrang for his experiments in dark magic. He arrived in Godric's Hollow with ambition blazing in his eyes, and Albus recognized something of himself in that fire. They were both visionaries, both brilliant beyond measure, both weary of the small-minded rules that shackled wizardkind. Together they dreamed of a world where wizards could live openly, ruling benevolently over muggles for the greater good. That phrase, so harmless on the surface, became their shared mantra. Night after night, they discussed philosophy, ethics, and magical power. Albus believed they could reshape the future. Grindelwald believed they could control it. And caught in the middle was Ariana, fragile and frightened, her magic an ever-present threat. Aberforth saw what Albus refused to see, that Grindelwald's charisma was turning his brother's grief into dangerous idealism. When Aberforth confronted them, the argument erupted into chaos. 3 wands were drawn, 3 tempers flared, and in that moment of unleashed magic, Ariana was struck down. No one ever knew whose spell killed her. Grindelwald fled. Aberforth shattered Albus's nose, and Dumbledore's heart never healed. From that day, Albus Dumbledore abandoned his dreams of domination and power. He turned inward, devoted himself to study and service, vowing never again to seek control over others. His brilliance remained, but his ambition became tempered by remorse. Every triumph afterward, the discovery of 12 uses of dragon's blood, his work with Flamel, his rise through Hogwarts was shadowed by the echo of that summer. Many wizards remembered Dumbledore as the wise old headmaster, serene and all-knowing, but few remember the fire of his youth, the restless mind that once courted danger. To understand Dumbledore is to see the boy behind the legend, the boy who learned too late that brilliance without compassion leads only to ruin. The death of Ariana became the compass of his life. Every choice he made thereafter, every mercy, every hesitation, every refusal to seize power came from that wound. As the years passed, he earned respect across the wizarding world. He joined the faculty of Hogwarts as a transfiguration professor, and quickly became known for his unconventional methods. Students adored him, not just for his intelligence, but for the warmth that radiated from his humility. Beneath that kindness, though, lived a man haunted by ghosts. His letters from that period are rare, but those that survive speak of loneliness and reflection. He wrote once to Elphius Doge, his oldest friend, that it is a curious thing to live long enough to become wise, yet too late to be forgiven. When one reads the story of Albus Dumbledore's youth, it becomes clear that his greatness was not born of triumph, but of loss. It was loss that forged his empathy. It was regret that taught him mercy. The boy from Mold on the Wold, who once dreamed of glory, became the man who taught generations that love, not power, is the strongest form of magic. This is where his legend begins, not in battlefields or grand offices, but in a broken home, a sister's silence, and a brother's rage. From that crucible emerged the wizard who would one day stand against darkness itself. After Ariana's death, Albus Dumbledore retreated into silence. He did not return to public life for months. The once brilliant prodigy of Hogwarts was now a recluse in Godric's Hollow, haunted by the echo of his sister's last scream and the memory of the friend who had vanished without a trace. Gellert Grindelwald fled Britain the same night Ariana died. The newspaper said he had returned to his homeland, somewhere in Central Europe, but no one knew for sure. Dumbledore never spoke his name again for decades. To those who knew him, it was as though a part of his soul had gone missing. Eventually, Albus emerged. He accepted a post at Hogwarts, first as a professor of transfiguration. Students remembered him as gentle, humorous, and endlessly curious. He taught not with authority, but with questions, forcing his pupils to think, to imagine, to care. Yet behind that warmth, he carried a quiet grief that never faded. He had seen what ambition without restraint could do, and it terrified him. While Dumbledore rebuilt his life, far away in Europe, Grindelwald began to build his empire. He spoke of liberation, of ending the secrecy that bound wizard kind. To some, his words sounded noble. For the greater good, he would say, but those who followed him learned the truth soon enough. Beneath his rhetoric lay tyranny. His followers called themselves the acolytes of the greater good, and their symbol, a mark of the deathly hallows, spread like wildfire across the continent. For years, the world turned a blind eye. Dumbledore, meanwhile, remained at Hogwarts, teaching, studying, writing essays on magical theory that would later become classics. But inside, he knew what Grindelwald was becoming. He had known it since their youth. He could see it in every headline, every whisper of dark experiments in Nurmengard, every new disappearance. And yet, he did nothing. He told himself it was not his place, that others would stop Grindelwald, that his duty was to his students. But the truth, buried deep beneath layers of reason and shame, was this: Albus Dumbledore was afraid, not of death nor of defeat, but of himself. To face Grindelwald meant revisiting everything he had once believed, everything that had destroyed his family. It meant admitting that he had loved him. For make no mistake, Dumbledore did love him, not in the way tales of romance tell, but in the raw, human way that admiration becomes devotion, and devotion becomes blindness. Dumbledore had seen brilliance in Grindelwald that mirrored his own, and in their youth he had mistaken that reflection for destiny. To fight him now felt like fighting the ghost of who he might have been. But as the 1930s unfolded, Grindelwald's movement could no longer be ignored. Across Europe, wizarding communities trembled, ministries fell, magical creatures were enslaved. Even the Muggle world, on the brink of its own war, felt the tremors of his rise. Dumbledore, still silent, became the one name whispered in hope. Only he could stop him, people said. Only Dumbledore. He refused year after year, until the day he could no longer look away. That day came in 1945. By then, Grindelwald had built Nurmengard Castle, both fortress and prison. He ruled from it as a dark messiah, wielding a wand unlike any other, the Elder Wand, one of the fabled Deathly Hallows. With it, he was invincible. He believed himself destined to master death itself. When news reached Dumbledore that Grindelwald possessed the Elder Wand, something inside him broke. He had spent a lifetime avoiding the shadow of his past, but now his past had claimed the greatest power known to wizard kind. He realized there was no escaping it, no atonement without confrontation. So, quietly, he prepared for war. There are no official records of how the duel began. What we know is drawn from witness accounts, scattered memories, and the ruins left behind. It took place in the heart of Europe, some say in Austria, others in the German Alps. Two of the greatest wizards who ever lived met, and the world trembled. Their duel lasted hours, maybe days. The sky turned black with storm clouds, rivers froze, forests burned. Magic of an age long forgotten was unleashed. Grindelwald fought with all the arrogance of his creed, Dumbledore with the sorrow of a man who had run from this moment all his life. In the end, remorse triumphed over ambition. Dumbledore disarmed Grindelwald, the only wizard ever to do so, and took the Elder Wand. When the smoke cleared, the Dark Wizard was chained in the very prison he had built. Dumbledore refused to kill him. He said later that mercy is the last gift the living owe the fallen. Others called it weakness, but Dumbledore knew what no one else did, that killing Grindelwald would be killing what remained of the boy he had once loved. The duel of 1945 became legend. To this day, it stands as the greatest magical duel in history, a clash of ideologies as much as spells, domination versus compassion, control versus understanding. For Dumbledore, it was not victory, it was absolution. The chains around Grindelwald's wrists were, in a way, the ones around Dumbledore's soul. With every link, he closed a chapter that had haunted him since youth. The ministry begged him to become minister for magic, but he declined every time. "I do not crave power," he said. "I have seen what it does to those who do." Instead, he devoted himself to the school, to teaching, to nurturing young minds who might one day carry the torch of wisdom instead of domination. It was during those years that his reputation as the greatest wizard of the age solidified. He corresponded with magical scholars worldwide, debated alchemy with Nicholas Flamel, and served on the Wizengamot. But beneath the accolades, Dumbledore remained a man marked by memory. Grindelwald lived, imprisoned in Nurmengard. Sometimes, when visitors mentioned the war, his eyes would grow distant. He never spoke of the duel again. He never wrote of it. Only much later, when Harry Potter would confront him with the truth of his past, would Dumbledore finally whisper, "I was more gifted than most, and I was more foolish than I cared to admit." What made Dumbledore great was not that he was flawless. He had walked the path of ambition, stumbled into darkness, and turned back toward the light. Every decision of his later life, his patience with others, his refusal to judge too quickly, his insistence that love was the greatest magic, sprang from that turning point. The duel with Grindelwald was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of Dumbledore's redemption. Grindelwald, for his part, languished in his fortress prison for decades. Visitors said he never spoke, never escaped, never begged for mercy. Only once, long after Dumbledore's death, would his name resurface, when another dark wizard, Lord Voldemort, sought the Elder Wand and found Grindelwald still guarding its secret. Even then, the man who once sought to master death refused to betray Dumbledore. Perhaps, at the end, he too understood what Albus had learned. that love, in all its pain and contradiction, is stronger than fear. By the close of the 1940s, the wizarding world was free again. Dumbledore had become its quiet guardian, standing at the crossroads of history, one hand holding a wand of legend, the other still trembling from loss. The world saw only the calm headmaster. Few ever glimpsed the man beneath, whose every smile was an act of penance, whose every kindness was a rebellion against the cruelty he once believed necessary. That is the tragedy and triumph of Albus Dumbledore. The greatest wizard who ever lived was, at his core, the boy who learned that power without empathy destroys everything it touches. In the quiet years after the war against Grindelwald, the wizarding world longed for peace. Albus Dumbledore had delivered it, though he wore no medals and accepted no titles. He returned to Hogwarts as a teacher, but those who studied under him felt they were in the presence of something greater. Not merely a professor, but a philosopher whose lessons were stitched with the wisdom bought by sorrow. By the 1950s, Dumbledore's name carried a reverence matched by none. His mastery of transfiguration was unparalleled, but his real gift lay in his teaching. He saw potential where others saw trouble. He believed every student, no matter their blood or background, deserved a chance to choose who they would become. It was during these years that the school, long divided by prejudice, began to feel a quiet transformation. Under Dumbledore's influence, Hogwarts slowly grew into a sanctuary where courage, loyalty, and curiosity could flourish together. He had his detractors, of course. Some members of the old pureblood families resented his progressive ideas. They whispered that he was too soft, too forgiving, too enamored of muggles. But Dumbledore paid no heed. He had seen what hatred could do. He preferred to fight it with kindness. Among his students was a boy who would one day become his greatest failure. Tom arrived at Hogwarts in 1938, an orphan raised in a Muggle institution. Dumbledore first met him there, at Wool's orphanage. The memory would stay with him forever. A pale, handsome child with dark eyes that burned with intelligence and cold control. Even as a boy, Riddle understood power, and he feared dependency above all else. He showed Dumbledore his treasures, stolen trinkets, tokens of dominion over others. Albus sensed danger in him then, but believed, perhaps naively, that guidance and compassion could save him. At Hogwarts, Riddle thrived. He was brilliant, charming, and ambitious. Teachers adored him. Students followed him. Yet beneath that polished exterior lurked a void. An incapacity for love and an obsession with his own supremacy. He collected secrets the way others collected friendships, and the greatest secret of all was the Chamber of Secrets itself. When the monster within was released and a girl was killed, Dumbledore was the only one who suspected Tom Riddle. But he had no proof. The boy graduated untouched by justice, a victor in a game only he knew he was playing. Years passed. Riddle disappeared into the world, traveling to ancient lands and forbidden places, studying magic few dared to speak aloud. Rumors rose of a dark wizard gathering followers. He called himself Voldemort. He saw in Voldemort the echo of Grindelwald, the same charisma, the same belief that power justified pain. Only this time there was no affection to temper his resolve. This time he would not hesitate. In 1956, Armando Dippet, the then headmaster, retired. The staff and governors unanimously chose Dumbledore as his successor. He accepted reluctantly, saying that leadership is a burden best carried with doubt. Under his guidance, Hogwarts flourished as never before. He modernized curricula, encouraged study of Muggle science alongside magical theory, and created a culture of openness. Students remembered him for his humor, his odd socks, his half-moon spectacles glinting over a cup of tea, and the sense that he saw right through them and loved what he saw nonetheless. But his heart was never at peace. Voldemort's shadow grew in the dark, and Dumbledore knew what was coming. He founded a group of wizards and witches dedicated to resisting the rising darkness, the First Order of the Phoenix. He did not seek glory. He sought preparation. He had learned that evil never dies. It waits for the moment when the good grow comfortable. During these years, his research into magic deepened further. He became renowned for his theories on the power of love and sacrifice, concepts most wizards dismissed as sentimental. Dumbledore understood that love was not a weakness, but an ancient magic, older than spells themselves. He would later see that truth tested in ways the world could barely comprehend. When Voldemort first fell, it was not because of wands or armies. It was because a mother chose to die for her child. The boy who lived, Harry Potter, became a symbol of hope, and Dumbledore once again stood at the center of a world on the brink of change. He was the one who left Harry with the Dursleys, knowing the ancient protection of blood would keep him safe. He was the one who watched from afar as the boy grew in ignorance of his fame. And he was the one who waited for the day Harry would come to Hogwarts so that he could teach him not just magic, but the meaning of choice. During those quiet years after Voldemort's defeat, Dumbledore became a living legend. Wizards traveled from around the world to seek his counsel. The ministry continued to offer him positions of power. He refused everyone. He preferred the company of children, where hope was still alive and prejudice still unlearned. But peace was never meant to last. Whispers of Voldemort's return began to surface. Objects of dark magic resurfaced. Strange deaths occurred in the shadows. Dumbledore knew before anyone else that the Dark Lord had not truly died, that his soul had been anchored to the world by something unnatural. He had read ancient texts, seen patterns in riddles past, and recognized what few dared to believe, that Voldemort had split his soul into fragments, creating Horcruxes. From that moment, Dumbledore's mission changed. He was no longer the schoolmaster content to educate. He became a guardian against a darkness that refused to die. Every decision, every secret, every gentle smile hid a calculated plan to prepare the next generation for a battle they did not yet know was coming. To understand Dumbledore in this era is to see a man of contradictions, light-hearted and mysterious, yet carrying the weight of every loss he had ever endured. He knew more than any wizard alive, and because of that knowledge, he felt more alone than any man in the world. He once told a student, "It is our choices, far more than our abilities, that show what we truly are." But what he did not say was that his own choices still haunted him. The choice to love Grindelwald, the choice to fight him, the choice to let Harry face a fate he could not escape. By the time The Boy Who Lived arrived at Hogwarts in 1991, Albus Dumbledore was already a legend carved in stone. Students spoke of him in hushed awe. Professors followed his lead with absolute trust. But beneath that serene smile, the protector of Hogwarts was already laying the foundation for the final war. A war he knew he would not live to see end. When Harry Potter first arrived at Hogwarts in 1991, Albus Dumbledore was nearing the twilight of his life. Yet to the eyes of students, he was timeless. that half-moon smile, the twinkle in his eyes that made even the most nervous first year feel at home. To Harry, he was a mystery. To Dumbledore, Harry was a destiny long foreseen. It had been 10 years since the night Voldemort fell, the night Dumbledore had found a broken cottage in Godric's Hollow and a crying baby amidst the ruins. He had understood at once what had happened. Lily Potter's sacrifice had created an ancient protection, one rooted in the oldest kind of magic, love freely given. It had done what even the greatest spells could not. It had turned death itself into a shield. From that moment, Dumbledore knew Harry would become both weapon and witness. A child marked by fate, not because of prophecy alone, but because his life had been forged by the purest act of love. But Dumbledore also knew something darker, that the spell had not destroyed Voldemort completely. Voldemort's obsession with immortality had crossed boundaries few dared to imagine. There was only one explanation: Horcruxes. In his heart, Dumbledore suspected the truth before anyone else, that a fragment of Voldemort's soul had attached itself to Harry that night. He saw it in the boy's lightning-shaped scar, in his ability to speak, Parseltongue, in the strange connection between them. Yet, he said nothing. He chose, once again, to protect through silence. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore watched Harry closely. He never interfered directly in the boy's adventures, though he always seemed to appear when guidance was most needed. He gave wisdom like riddles, believing lessons discovered are stronger than those handed freely. When Harry first faced Voldemort's shade, in the form of Professor Quirrell, Dumbledore was not surprised. He had always known the battle would begin long before Harry was ready. Throughout Harry's school years, Dumbledore's role was that of a quiet architect. He placed the pieces of destiny where they needed to be. The Sorcerer's Stone protected beneath the school, the Mirror of Erised hiding deeper truths, the appointment of key figures who would later shape Harry's courage, Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, even the reluctant Severus Snape. Each move was deliberate, each silence chosen. He was not perfect. Dumbledore understood that his kindness sometimes became manipulation. He did not take pleasure in it, but he believed the alternative. He saw the same repeating pattern in history: power rising, innocence dying, and only sacrifice breaking the cycle. He was determined to prepare Harry differently. The boy had to learn not only how to fight, but why to fight. As Voldemort returned to full strength in 1995, the wizarding world descended into denial and fear. The Ministry branded Dumbledore a liar. Newspapers mocked him, yet he stood firm. He had been here before. And so, he reformed the Order of the Phoenix. He rallied old allies, gathered spies, and prepared for a second war that the world refused to see coming. But this time, Dumbledore was not the unstoppable wizard of his youth. He was aging, his hands growing weaker, his eyes clouded with pain. The duel with Grindelwald had not broken him. He was carrying too many secrets, and one of them was killing him. In 1996, Dumbledore found the Cursed Ring, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, which contained not only a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul, but the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. For a moment, Dumbledore's restraint faltered. The stone promised what he desired most, the chance to see his family again, to say what had never been said to Ariana. He slipped the ring onto his finger, and the curse struck instantly. It would have killed any other wizard within seconds. Dumbledore survived only through Snape's intervention, but the curse would still claim his life, slowly, inevitably. He accepted it. He even saw it as a kind of justice. From that moment, his actions took on a quiet urgency. He confided in Snape, revealed his plan, and together they crafted a path toward the only ending that could defeat Voldemort for good. Dumbledore knew Harry would need to die, not by choice, but by destiny. It was a truth so heavy that Dumbledore carried it alone. To Harry, he remained the same gentle mentor. To the world, he was the unshakable guardian. Only Snape saw the frail man beneath, one preparing his own death to ensure the survival of another. In his final year, Dumbledore brought Harry on a journey through memory. Together, they explored the Pensieve, diving into fragments of Tom Riddle's past. From the orphanage to his time at Hogwarts, to his dark obsessions with immortality. Through these memories, Harry learned not only about Voldemort, but about the man guiding him, a teacher who believed that understanding even one's enemy is a form of strength. When Harry accused him of secrecy, Dumbledore said only, "I cared too much. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth." Their final mission together came in the summer of 1997, the retrieval of the locket, Horcrux. It was a journey through terror, one that tested even Dumbledore's endurance. The potion he drank in the cave to access the Horcrux brought him to his knees. He begged for death, for forgiveness, for release, words that revealed how haunted he truly was. But he finished the task, because Harry was watching, and Dumbledore would not let the boy see him fall. When they returned to Hogwarts that night, Draco Malfoy had been ordered to kill him. Dumbledore saw compassion in the boy's hesitation. He did not judge him, he pitied him. And then, at the top of the astronomy tower, Severus Snape fulfilled the promise Dumbledore had made him swear, to end his life before the curse could, and to protect Draco's soul from murder. The flash of green light ended an era. For the students, it was the death of their protector. For the world, it was the death of hope. But for Dumbledore, it was the final act of a lifetime spent trying to make peace with the past. He died knowing that every choice, even the cruel ones, had led Harry to the truth. He died trusting that love, once again, would conquer what power could not. And in death, Dumbledore's wisdom became eternal. His portrait still watches over Hogwarts, his name still whispered like a blessing. But those who truly understand his story know that his greatness was never born from being flawless. It was born from breaking, from rising, and from daring to believe that kindness could rewrite destiny. Albus Dumbledore was never the saint the world imagined him to be. He was something far more human, a man who had known love and loss, guilt and grace, and chose again and again to serve others even when it cost him everything. The death of Albus Dumbledore shook the wizarding world like an earthquake. The man who had defeated Grindelwald, defied Voldemort, and protected Hogwarts for half a century was gone. His body lay in white marble by the Black Lake, and the phoenix song that rose over his funeral echoed the grief of every heart that had ever known his kindness. But even in death, Dumbledore's influence did not end. It began. The boy who had relied on his mentor's guidance was suddenly left adrift, with no map, no reassurance, and no one to ask for answers. Yet that was exactly how Dumbledore had planned it. He had known he could not walk Harry's final road for him. He had spent years preparing him, not just to follow orders, but to think, to question, to choose. After his death, Dumbledore's will was read. It seemed simple, even sentimental, at first. Small gifts for 3 students who had meant the world to him. But every one of them was a clue to Ron Weasley, a deluminator, to light his way when darkness fell. To Hermione Granger, the tales of Beedle the Bard, the book that would reveal the secret of the Deathly Hallows. And to Harry, the snitch from his first Quidditch match, which would not open until the moment he was ready to die. To the Ministry, these were trinkets. To Dumbledore, they were the final steps in a plan he had spent decades shaping. For behind the legend of the boy who lived was the quiet architecture of Dumbledore's design. Every move he made, every word he left unsaid, guiding Harry toward the inevitable confrontation with Voldemort. Not because he sought to use him as a pawn, but because he believed Harry's capacity for love would achieve what Dumbledore's intellect could not. That faith was not blind. It was the culmination of everything he had learned in a century of mistakes. As Harry and his friends journeyed to destroy the Horcruxes, they discovered the layers of Dumbledore's past. Truths buried under decades of myth. The newspaper. The Daily Prophet published excerpts from Rita Skeeter's unauthorized biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. It painted him as an idealist-turned-manipulator, a man who once shared Grindelwald's dream of wizard supremacy. For the first time, the flawless image of Dumbledore cracked. He had worshipped the man, but now he saw shadows, the arrogance of youth, the secrecy, the manipulation. Dumbledore had never been the saint he appeared to be, and that realization was precisely the lesson he had hoped Harry would learn. He wanted those who could see that even the greatest among them were flawed, that wisdom was born not of perfection, but of humility. When Harry finally entered the Forbidden Forest, ready to die, it was Dumbledore who met him beyond the veil. In that strange, dreamlike space that looked like King's Cross Station, the old wizard appeared as calm and radiant as ever. Harry demanded the truth about his past, his plan, and his death, and Dumbledore, for once, told him everything. He admitted his greatest mistake, not in loving Grindelwald, but in craving power beside him. He admitted his manipulations, keeping Harry alive only so he could die at the right moment. And he admitted his fear of himself, of what he could have become if he'd seized the Hallows for the wrong reasons. In that conversation, the walls between teacher and student vanished. What remained were 2 souls laid bare, one nearing the end of his journey, the other just beginning his own. It was there that Dumbledore confessed the truth about the Elder Wand. He had possessed it since defeating Grindelwald in 1945. It was the most powerful wand in existence, but also the most dangerous. For whoever killed its master inherited its allegiance. Dumbledore had tried to die undefeated, to break the chain of violence that bound it. That was why he asked Snape to end his life, not merely to save Draco, but to die by the hand of a man he trusted, not a murderer seeking power. He had hoped that would confuse the wand's loyalty, rendering it powerless to serve the next Dark Lord. It was a brilliant plan, and a tragic one, because it failed in the smallest, simplest way. Draco Malfoy disarmed Dumbledore before Snape struck. In that single act, without meaning to, Draco became the wand's new master. And when Harry later disarmed Draco, the Elder Wand passed to him, not through murder, but through mercy. Even in death, Dumbledore's ideals triumphed. The wand, symbol of domination, was conquered by compassion. And when Harry later used it to repair his own broken wand rather than wield it for power, Dumbledore's life came full circle, the student completing what the master could not. After Voldemort's final defeat, Harry returned the Elder Wand to Dumbledore's tomb, where it would rest with the man who had carried it, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. A reminder that even ultimate power cannot save one from guilt, loss, or love. Dumbledore's portrait still hangs in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. It watches quietly, offering guidance when needed but rarely intervening. He is no longer the commanding figure of authority he once was, but a symbol of wisdom tempered by error, of brilliance softened by humility. His legacy is not just written in history books or etched in marble. It lives in every child who learns at Hogwarts that courage is not the absence of fear, and knowledge is nothing without compassion. It lives in the freedom of the wizarding world, in the friendships that outlast wars, and in the truth that light does not destroy darkness. It endures it. The world remembers Albus Dumbledore as the greatest wizard of his age, but those who look deeper see something truer. He was a man who carried unbearable guilt and turned it into grace. He never sought immortality, though he could have taken it. He never claimed glory, though it was his for the taking. He lived for others and died believing that love, foolish, fragile, human love, was worth more than all the magic in the world. Even now, his story continues to shape the generations that follow. The phoenix on his tomb remains a fitting symbol, rebirth through fire, hope through loss. Dumbledore's fire burned bright, but never to destroy. It burned to illuminate the path for those who came after him. And in that way, he achieved what even the deathly Hallows could not. He conquered death, not by evading it, but by living so fully that it lost its power over him. Albus Percival Wulfric, Brian Dumbledore, a name long enough to hold a lifetime of contradictions, scholar and warrior, manipulator and savior, sinner and saint. His story teaches that greatness is not born from purity, but from the courage to face one's own darkness, and to choose again and again to do what is right, even when it hurts. That is his true legacy. Before the duels, before the legends, there was a young man whose name carried no weight yet, a boy from Godric's Hollow who entered adulthood carrying more sorrow than most men bear in a lifetime. Albus Dumbledore, barely out of school, had every reason to hide from the world after his sister's death. But genius rarely rests long in silence. When he returned to public life, he did so quietly, through letters, papers, and discoveries that began to circulate in scholarly circles. His first essays on transfiguration and alchemical transmutation were published before his 21st birthday. His correspondence with Nicholas Flamel, the immortal alchemist, grew into a friendship that would last over a century. Together, they debated not how to create gold or eternal life, but how to use transformation as a metaphor for the human soul. How every act of change in magic mirrors change within the self. Even then, Dumbledore was more philosopher than scientist. He could have become a recluse scholar, known only for brilliance. But fate, as ever, had other plans. His talent drew the attention of the wizarding world, and he soon took a teaching post at Hogwarts. Some were skeptical of his youth, a professor scarcely older than his students, but that skepticism vanished quickly. He taught transfiguration as though it were poetry, his classroom alive with curiosity. He made even the simplest spell feel like discovery. His students adored him, not for his power, but for his ability to make learning a form of wonder. It was during this time that he met many who would later shape his life. Elphius Doge, his loyal friend from school, who became one of his few lifelong confidants. Bathilda Bagshot, the historian who first introduced him to the idea of the Deathly Hallows, and even a young Minerva McGonagall, who would one day stand by his side through every storm. Dumbledore's early research went beyond transfiguration. He became fascinated by the limits of magical law, how morality intersected with ability. He saw that most wizards never questioned why a spell should or shouldn't be used. They simply followed rules. To him, that was dangerous. Power without reflection was chaos. He once wrote in a letter to Doge, "Every spell is an act of intent. The wand obeys the hand, but the magic obeys the heart." But Dumbledore's heart, even then, was divided between intellectual pursuit and the ache of guilt that never left him. He rarely spoke of his family. When asked about his sister, he would only say, "She was too good for this world." He never mentioned Grindelwald by name again, though he kept the broken remains of their friendship like invisible scars. As his reputation grew, so did the temptations that came with it. The Ministry of Magic approached him several times in his youth, offering him positions of influence. He declined them all, claiming that his loyalty belonged to Hogwarts. Privately, he admitted to Doge that power frightened him. He had seen what it did to those who believed themselves destined to lead. Yet, paradoxically, he could never escape it. Even those in high office deferred to his judgment. When disputes arose among wizarding nations, it was Dumbledore they sought as mediator. His ability to see through lies, to cut to the heart of motives, was unmatched. It was said that no one could lie to him without feeling the truth tremble on their tongue. During those early decades, he also began his long study of ancient magical artifacts. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Invisibility Cloak, collectively known as the Deathly Hallows, he became a quiet obsession. He didn't seek to possess them, he sought to understand them. What did they symbolize about humanity's struggle with mortality and power? In the Hallows myth, he saw a reflection of his own life, the desire to master death, the temptation of power, and the final wisdom that to greet death willingly is the greatest act of courage. He corresponded often with scholars abroad. Some were charmed by his humor, others unsettled by his intensity. He could be disarmingly gentle one moment and devastatingly incisive the next. When one French scholar accused him of romantic idealism, Dumbledore replied, "It is not romantic to believe in goodness. It is realistic, for the world has never been saved by cynics." Still, beneath all that brilliance, loneliness lingered. He never married. He never spoke of love again. It was as though the fire that had once burned in him, the reckless brilliance that Grindelwald had awakened, had been sealed away, replaced by quiet discipline. His students saw the charm, few ever glimpsed the pain. He devoted himself to Hogwarts completely. He mentored young witches and wizards, protected the misfits others ignored, and turned the castle into something sacred, a place where even broken souls could rebuild themselves. To him, teaching was not merely about spells. It was about giving young people the chance he never had, to learn before tragedy taught them instead. Those who studied under him during that era would later recall how he would stay after class, sipping tea by candlelight, listening to his students' worries as if they were the most important problems in the world. He never made anyone feel small, and yet every kindness he gave was also an atonement, a repayment for the life he had taken, the sister he couldn't save. By the time the 1930s arrived, Dumbledore's reputation was unshakable. He was considered the finest wizard of his generation, perhaps of all time. Across Europe, dark movements began to rise. A name whispered in foreign tongues, Gellert Grindelwald. His rhetoric was persuasive, his ambition terrifying. He preached of a new order, a brighter future, one where wizards would guide the world for the greater good. To many, his words sounded noble. To Albus Dumbledore, they sounded like ghosts. When the first reports reached him, towns destroyed, families vanished, resistance crushed, Dumbledore refused to speak his name, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't bear it. The past he thought buried had returned, wearing the face of the man he had once loved. The young scholar who had built his life on restraint would soon face the test that would define him. He had spent decades studying morality, teaching wisdom, preaching compassion. Now the time had come to act, to face the one soul who had mirrored his own. And so, the man who had sworn never again to chase power prepared for the one battle he could no longer avoid. That battle would come to define history, but the man who walked into it was not the same youth who once dreamed of glory. He was older now, tempered by guilt, armed not with arrogance, but with remorse. He did not seek victory, he sought redemption, and in that, Albus Dumbledore found the one kind of strength no book could teach, the courage to confront the reflection of his own mistakes. To understand Albus Dumbledore, one must understand his relationship with the Deathly Hallows, the three legendary artifacts said to make their possessor the Master of Death. Few wizards ever believed the Hallows were real. Dumbledore not only believed, he knew, and unlike those who sought them for conquest, he sought them for understanding. The legend, as told in the tales of Beedle the Bard, spoke of three brothers who cheated death. Each was offered a gift, a wand of unbeatable power, a stone to summon the dead, and a cloak to hide from death itself. The first brother, proud, asked for the wand. The second, grieving, asked for the stone. The third, humble, asked for the cloak. In the end, death took the first two, but the third greeted death as an old friend. That story shaped Dumbledore's philosophy because in it, he saw his own reflection in all three brothers. In his youth, he had been the first brother, craving power, convinced he could use it for good. In his grief, he had been the second, longing to see his sister again, reaching for the resurrection stone, even when he knew it would destroy him. But in his wisdom, at the end, he became the third, ready to meet death without fear, knowing that mastery over it comes not from avoidance, but acceptance. The Hallows haunted Dumbledore long before he ever held one. Bathilda Bagshot had shown him the symbol as a boy, the triangular mark that represented them all, the circle for the stone, the line for the wand, and the triangle for the cloak. When Grindelwald carved that same symbol into the world's nightmares, it became a scar upon Dumbledore's conscience. For what began as an intellectual fascination between two gifted boys had turned into the banner of a warlord. He never forgave himself for it. When Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald in 1945, the Elder Wand passed into his hands. He had, without seeking it, become the master of the most dangerous Hallows of all. And though he used it only for good, to teach, to heal, to protect. It was still a reminder of temptation. Every spell he cast with it was an act of restraint, a constant whisper in his mind asking, "Will you be like the first brother again?" When he found it, Dumbledore's discipline faltered. For a moment, all his wisdom, all his age, all his learning fell away. He saw not the stone's danger, but its promise. The chance to see his mother, his father, and his beloved sister once more. He reached for it and paid the price. The curse nearly killed him, and though Snape contained it, the wound never healed. It marked him, body and soul, as the second brother, a man who had tried to recall the dead and learned that grief cannot be undone by magic. The third Hallow, the Cloak of Invisibility, belonged to Harry Potter. It had passed down through the Peverell line, hidden for centuries until it found its way to the boy who carried not just one of the Hallows, but the heart to use it wisely. To Dumbledore, that was no coincidence. It was proof of something deeper, that the Hallows were not meant to be owned, but to test the soul of those who sought them. The cloak was a gift for the humble, the wand a trap for the proud, the stone a curse for the grieving. And so, in the end, Dumbledore's greatest lesson was not about mastery, but about surrender. The man who once sought to control death came to embrace it as a teacher. He wrote in one of his private letters, later discovered by Elphias Doge, "Do not pity the dead, my friend. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." It was the creed of a man who had seen death from every side, who had killed, lost, and almost destroyed himself, chasing what could never be tamed. Even his relationship with the Hallows reflected the journey of his soul. He had earned the Elder Wand through victory. He had suffered the Resurrection Stone through folly. He had understood the Invisibility Cloak through observation, through watching Harry use it, not for dominance, but for decency. Where Dumbledore once believed mastery was achieved through strength, he came to believe it was achieved through empathy. To him, the true master of death was not the wizard who owned all three Hallows, but the one who understood them. It was Harry, the boy who faced mortality without fear, who refused to use the stone to cling to ghosts, who returned the wand to its rest. Dumbledore had prepared him for that moment, not to repeat his mistakes, but to surpass him. That was the mark of his greatness. He wanted those after him to be better than he was. When he met Harry in the liminal space between life and death, Dumbledore spoke with a serenity that came from finally being free of the Hallow's shadow. He had seen all he needed to see. He had loved, lost, and learned. And he told Harry the truth that had defined his entire life. It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. Because Albus Dumbledore had been many things, a prodigy, a sinner, a savior. But in the end, what defined him were his choices, to turn from power, to seek forgiveness, to believe in the next generation, even when the world gave him every reason to give up on it. His understanding of death was not theoretical, it was personal. He had seen his sister die in front of him. He had watched students fall in war. He had faced curses that burned his own flesh. And through it all, he had learned that to live well is to accept that we will lose everything we love, and still love anyway. That is the heart of Dumbledore's philosophy. He did not conquer death. He befriended it. The three brothers of legend had each met death differently. One fought, one pleaded, one accepted. Albus Dumbledore lived all three stories in one lifetime, and in doing so, he proved that wisdom is not born from avoiding mistakes, but from surviving them. His life was a map of what it means to be human, brilliant yet broken, flawed yet striving, haunted yet hopeful. And when he finally walked beyond the veil, he did not walk as a master, but as a man who had finally found peace. When Albus Dumbledore's life ended on the Tower of Hogwarts, many thought his story ended too. But legends do not die with the men who lived them. They evolve, whispered through classrooms, remembered in quiet moments, carried by those whose hearts he changed. In that way, Dumbledore never truly left the world he protected. His portrait still hangs in the headmaster's office, eyes twinkling with that familiar spark of mischief and understanding. The students who visit it say that it feels almost alive, that when the castle sleeps, the portrait hums softly, as if the man within it is still thinking, still watching, still caring. And perhaps he is, because Dumbledore's magic was never just in spells or artifacts. It was in the ideas he left behind, in how people lived after him. When peace finally settled after Voldemort's fall, Hogwarts became not only a school, but a sanctuary of healing. Many of the reforms Dumbledore had championed during his life, the protection of magical creatures, the integration of Muggleborns, the belief that love is the highest magic, became the pillars of a new age. Minerva McGonagall, his closest confidant, carried forward his ideals with quiet strength. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had once served under him in the Order, rose to become Minister for Magic and rebuilt the ministry in Dumbledore's image, transparent, tolerant, guided by reason instead of fear. Even Severus Snape, the most complicated of all his followers, found redemption in the wake of Dumbledore's death. Though the world judged Snape harshly, it was Dumbledore who had seen the potential for goodness within him when no one else could. That belief, that a single act of love could redeem a lifetime of bitterness, was the cornerstone of Dumbledore's faith in humanity. It was that same faith that shaped the new world. Harry Potter, of course, carried the greatest piece of Dumbledore's legacy. For Harry, Dumbledore was more than a mentor. He was the moral compass by which Harry learned to navigate the darkness of his own choices, even when Harry doubted him. Even when he learned of the man's secrets and flaws, he never stopped believing in the goodness behind his intentions. And that belief, that quiet forgiveness, was Dumbledore's final lesson, that even heroes are human, and to love them is to accept their imperfections. Years after the war, Harry would name his son Albus Severus Potter, not to honor a flawless idol, but to honor two men who taught him the same truth in opposite ways, that courage is not in being pure, but in choosing light despite the darkness within. It was perhaps the greatest tribute Dumbledore could have received, to have his name carried by a child born into peace. But Dumbledore's influence extended far beyond Harry and his circle. Every student he ever taught carried a piece of his wisdom into the world. Some became teachers, some aurors, some healers, some ordinary wizards living quiet lives, but all remembered him not for his power, but for the way he made them believe they mattered. That was his greatest magic, to look at another soul and make it feel seen. He once said, "Words are, in my not-so-humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic," and long after his wand lay still, his words continued to cast spells, not of destruction, but of inspiration. They lived in every child who learned that courage and compassion are stronger than cruelty and fear. His treatises on alchemy, transfiguration, and magical ethics became foundational texts. But it was his later essays, those written after Grindelwald's defeat, that scholars cite most often. In them, he argued that the measure of a wizard's greatness lies not in the magic he wields, but in the love he gives. At the time, it was considered sentimental. Now, it is considered prophetic. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Dumbledore's legacy is how it transcended even the wizarding world. He bridged the gap between worlds that had long stood apart. Through his compassion for muggles, his defense of house elves, his protection of centaurs and werewolves, he reminded everyone that true civilization lies not in superiority, but in empathy. He saw no hierarchy in existence, only the shared struggle to live kindly in a harsh world. And yet, even in remembrance, there remains mystery. The Elder Wand, buried with him, sealed within his marble tomb, still hums with ancient power. The phoenix that sang at his funeral, Fawkes, vanished into the sky and was never seen again. Some say Fawkes returns to Hogwarts once a century, that his cry can be heard in the dead of winter. Others say Dumbledore's spirit walks the castle's corridors, guiding lost students toward courage. Whether myth or magic, no one truly knows. But one thing is certain, his presence lingers, because legends like Dumbledore's are not meant to end. They evolve, retold by those who find meaning in them. Every time a student at Hogwarts faces fear with kindness, every time a wizard chooses mercy over vengeance, every time a child believes that love can change the world. And perhaps that was his final and truest victory. Not defeating Grindelwald, nor outwitting Voldemort, nor mastering the Elder Wand, but proving that goodness can be taught, that wisdom can outlive death, and that even the most broken hearts can leave behind light enough to guide the next generation. In the end, Albus Dumbledore's story is not about magic at all. It is about redemption. It is about the courage to admit failure, the grace to forgive, and the strength to love despite knowing how fragile it is. He showed that greatness lies not in power, but in restraint, not in triumph, but in understanding. He taught the world that kindness is the most revolutionary act of all. When he once told Harry, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." And because he had lived all of it, his words carried the weight of truth. So when people say that Albus Dumbledore was the greatest wizard who ever lived, they are only half right. He was more than that. He was the greatest reminder of what humanity can be: fragile, flawed, endlessly striving, and capable of choosing love even in the shadow of loss. The phoenix on his tomb is not a symbol of magic. It is a symbol of memory. It reminds us that light, once kindled, never truly dies. And that is Dumbledore's legacy, a light that outlives its bearer, a story that outgrows its legend, a man who found immortality, not in power, but in peace. Our Dumbledore's tale has come to an end, but if your mind still wanders among the embers of his story, follow me. For where one legend fades, another begins. Far from Hogwarts, across the silent valleys of Europe, another boy once dreamed of greatness. His name was Gellert Grindelwald, and if Dumbledore's light was born from remorse, then Grindelwald's darkness was born from vision. He was a prodigy, too, dazzling, magnetic, dangerous in his brilliance. At Durmstrang Institute, his teachers saw both genius and ruthlessness. He mastered spells others only whispered about, experimenting on the boundaries of what magic could do. When he was expelled for near-fatal experiments, the boy did not cry or beg. He smiled, because to him, expulsion was not punishment, it was freedom. He left Durmstrang with a wand and a dream to reshape the world. Grindelwald believed wizardkind had spent too long hiding from muggles, shrinking from destiny. He saw secrecy as weakness and control as salvation. He spoke of revolution with the conviction of a prophet, but his revolution was built not on compassion, only on control. In the summer of 1899, his path crossed with Albus Dumbledore's, and the world shuddered for what might have been. Two minds alike in brilliance met in the quiet lanes of Godric's Hollow, and for a brief, burning moment, they believed they could save the world together. But salvation is a dangerous word. It can mean healing or domination. Grindelwald saw himself as destiny's chosen hand. He spoke of the greater good, of mercy through order, of peace through dominance. Dumbledore saw beauty in his mind, believed in the purity of his vision, until Ariana died and the dream died with her. When he fled, Grindelwald carried with him not just a plan, but a wound. He had lost the only person who could match him. And in losing Albus, he lost the last thread of restraint that tied him to humanity. Years later, he re-emerged under a new symbol, the Deathly Hallows. To most, a fairy tale. To Grindelwald, prophecy. He believed the one who united the Hallows would rule over life and death, and he declared himself that master. He traveled across Europe gathering followers, idealists, outcasts, zealots, those who believed in his vision of a world ruled by wizards for the greater good. He built his fortress, Nurmengard, with towers like black fangs against the sky, carved with his symbol, the circle, line, and triangle of the Hallows. And there he began his war. It was not a war of chaos like Voldemort's. It was organized, persuasive, almost seductive. Grindelwald promised liberation, not destruction. He offered power wrapped in morality. That was his genius and his curse. Nations fell to him without bloodshed, through belief. The wizarding world stood at the edge of transformation, until one man stepped forward to stop him. When the two met again, it was not as friends, but as opposites, the light and shadow of the same flame. Their duel in 1945 shook mountains. He looked at Albus and said softly, "So it ends, then, with mercy." And Dumbledore, who could not bear to kill the man he had once loved, locked him away in his own fortress. For decades, Grindelwald remained in Nurmengard. His power faded, his followers scattered. Yet even in defeat, his philosophy lived on, the idea that peace could be forced, that love was weakness, that order must be absolute. When Voldemort rose generations later, he echoed Grindelwald's vision, but without its restraint. Voldemort was cruelty untempered by belief. Grindelwald had been belief corrupted by pride. In the end, they met the same fate, consumed by the idea that control was salvation. Both fell to the same truth that Dumbledore had learned too late, that power without compassion is destruction, and love without humility becomes obsession. And so, as the world forgot the banners of Nurmengard, Grindelwald sat alone in his cell, the Elder Wand long gone, the Hallows myth turned to dust, until the day a pale figure came to his door, another who sought the wand. Voldemort. The snake-faced lord demanded to know where it lay. Grindelwald refused him, perhaps out of defiance, or perhaps, just perhaps, out of remorse. He died laughing, saying, "You will never win." In that final moment, he found what he had never known in life, peace born of truth. He had become, at last, the fool who understood the wisdom of love too late. And so ends the story of Gellert Grindelwald, the brilliant boy who tried to rule the world and learned too late that the world cannot be ruled, only understood. But if sleep has not yet claimed you, stay a little longer. For from the ashes of Grindelwald's fall rose another man whose life was written in silence and shadow, a spy, a protector, and a sinner redeemed. His name was Severus Snape. He was never a hero in the eyes of the world. To most, Severus Snape was a bitter man with a hooked nose and a cold voice, his black robes whispering like shadows down the halls of Hogwarts. But behind that sneer lived a story the world never truly saw. A story of love, betrayal, and redemption written in silence. Severus Snape was born to a Muggle father and a witch mother in the industrial town of Spinner's End. His childhood was gray, the smell of metal and neglect, the sound of arguments through thin walls. Magic, for him, was not wonder, it was escape. And when he first met Lily Evans, a bright, kind, Muggle-born girl with laughter like light, he found the one person who saw him, not as a misfit, but as a boy capable of gentleness. They met as children, playing by the riverbank, sharing secrets of the magical world that only he knew. For Snape, those moments were everything. For Lily, they were friendship. But time has a cruel way of dividing hearts. At Hogwarts, Snape was sorted into Slytherin, Lily into Gryffindor. Their paths, once bound by curiosity, diverged into opposing houses, opposing worlds. Snape was brilliant in potions, gifted in the dark arts, but socially isolated. He was drawn to the pure-blood elite, boys who mocked him, yet whose approval he sought. And Lily, watching from afar, saw the boy she loved turn slowly toward the darkness that would consume him. When Snape joined the Death Eaters, it was not out of ideology, but out of desperation. To belong, to matter, to prove his worth. He thought power would erase the shame of his name, but when he overheard a prophecy about a child destined to destroy Voldemort, a child born to Lily Potter, Snape's world collapsed. He ran to warn the Dark Lord, not realizing the prophecy would seal Lily's fate. And when Voldemort went to Godric's Hollow and Lily refused to step aside, Snape's soul shattered. Her death became the axis on which his life turned. He went to Dumbledore, broken and begging, "Hide them. Keep her safe," he pleaded. And when Dumbledore told him it was too late, Snape fell to his knees. Her son must live for her. It was the beginning of his redemption and his eternal punishment. From that day, Snape lived for one purpose, to protect the boy who reminded him of everything he had lost. He became Dumbledore's spy, walking the razor's edge between two masters. To Voldemort, he was loyal and cold. To Dumbledore, he was trusted and tormented. No one truly knew him. Students feared him, misunderstood him, hated him. Harry, especially, saw only cruelty, the harsh words, the favoritism toward Slytherins, the disdain that seemed personal. But beneath every insult lay an act of protection. Every detachment was a shield. Snape's bitterness was not born of hatred, but of grief too deep to heal. Dumbledore, who saw the truth in him, treated him not as a servant, but as an equal. They shared secrets no one else knew, even Harry. When Dumbledore's hand was cursed by the ring, it was Snape who prolonged his life. When Dumbledore planned his own death, it was Snape who bore the burden of carrying it out. He became executioner to the only man who ever believed in him. That act haunted him, but it also freed him. After Dumbledore's death, when Voldemort seized Hogwarts, Snape became headmaster, a title that should have meant triumph, but instead meant torment. He protected students in secret, even as he appeared their jailer. He saved those he could, at risk of his own life, while letting the world believe he had become the monster it feared. And when the war reached its final night, Snape's fate arrived swiftly. Voldemort, seeking the Elder Wand's true allegiance, turned on him. In the shrieking shack, the serpent's fangs pierced his neck. He fell, not with rage, but with resignation. When Harry knelt beside him, Snape's final words were not for power or revenge. They were for love. Look at me. He wanted to see Lily's eyes one last time. And in Harry's face, he did. When the truth was revealed, through the memories he gave Harry, the world finally saw who he had been all along. A man who endured hatred to protect the child of the woman he could never have. A man who died with no monument, no applause, and no comfort, but with peace. Snape's story is the mirror of Dumbledore's. Where Dumbledore's wisdom came from mercy, Snape's came from pain. Where Dumbledore guided with light, Snape guarded with shadow. Both men carried guilt. Both sought redemption. But Snape's redemption was silent, unseen, and absolute. When Harry named his son Albus Severus Potter, he did not choose those names lightly. He said, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." And in that sentence, Severus Snape found immortality. He was not a hero in shining robes. He was not a symbol of purity. He was proof that even the darkest soul can find light again, that love, even unreturned, can make life worth living. So when we whisper his name now, we do so with quiet reverence, not for the potions master who scowled at students, but for the man who lived in shadows so that others could live in light. Severus Snape, the spy, the sinner, the savior. A man who never asked for forgiveness, but earned it all the same.